Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. And welcome to the deep dive. Today we're not just skimming the surface of leadership theory. We are grabbing the tools and going straight into the foundation, the psychological wiring that determines whether you succeed or, well, secretly sabotage yourself. We're talking about the deep-seated flaws that every successful person has, but only the truly great ones actually choose to confront.
And our mission today is a real comprehensive deep dive into Martin Dubin's incredibly insightful book, Blindspotting: How to See What's Holding You Back as a Leader.
It's such a great title.
It is. And it's a crucial read because, as the title suggests, it's not really about external strategy or, market forces. It's about finding a systematic way to locate your specific, often hidden flaws, your blind spots, that inevitably interfere with your effectiveness, especially when the stakes get really high.
I think Dubin's approach is what makes this book so fascinating. His background is key here, isn't it? He's a clinical psychologist who successfully crossed the aisle into the business world.
Right. First as a CEO, then as an entrepreneur, and now as just a world-class leadership coach.
So you get this incredible dual perspective.
Exactly. That dual perspective means the entire book uses this inward-focused psychological lens. The core idea, really, is that we have to fundamentally understand who we are, our deepest fears, our motivations, our natural personality structures, before we can possibly hope to sustainably modulate our behavior in a professional context.
So the inner life dictates the outer life of leadership.
You've got it. That's the whole premise.
And that brings us to this central paradox Dubin highlights, which I think resonates with, well, pretty much everyone who's tasted success. We reach a certain level, usually based on our natural talents and our strengths, and then we hit a wall. A crisis emerges that our existing tool set, it just can't handle. We use the methods that got us this far, and then they suddenly stop working. Why? Why does that happen?
Because success is a high-speed accelerator for blind spots. I love that phrasing from him.
That's a great line.
Dubin argues that when we win, we often become so convinced that our exceptional qualities are the sole reason for the victory that we stop noticing the flaws that success has, allowed us to conveniently ignore. We become resistant to the very adaptation and growth that the next stage of success demands.
Okay, so let's unpack this with his key cautionary tale. I think this really brings it to life. We're talking about Marcus, the visionary founder of the augmented reality unicorn startup Aesthetics.
Yes.
Tell the listener what the world saw on the outside versus what was really happening inside that company.
Okay, so externally, Aesthetics was the definition of a rocket ship. I mean, they had tech that was years ahead of the pre-orders were just flooding in. They had immense capital, tremendous hype. Marcus was, the darling of the tech media.
He's on every magazine cover.
Totally. But the hidden disaster was in manufacturing. Their latest product, which was advertised as being virtually indestructible, was malfunctioning coming right out of the factory. The internal team knew it was just a catastrophic failure waiting to happen.
And Marcus's reaction, because that's where the blind spotting really comes into play.
Precisely. Instead of slowing down, empowering his manufacturing and ops team and, fixing the systemic serious issues, he just defaulted to his comfort zone.
He doubled down.
He doubled down on his primary strength, being the charismatic visionary. He focused entirely on raising more money, traveling the world, chasing good press. He was an innovator who suddenly desperately needed to be an executor and a leader.
Somebody focused on the boring process.
Exactly. But his internal identity and his motives, they exposed these deep, unseen flaws that just accelerated the business toward failure.
And the tragic irony is that the business eventually did shut down, right? Losing billions, largely because Marcus just couldn't switch gears. His greatest strengths became his undoing.
Yeah. So to help us avoid Marcus's fate, Dubin introduces the blind spotter model. If you can picture it, it's a set of concentric circles. At the very core, defining everything else, is motive, your deepest why.
Okay.
Layered around that are traits, emotion, and intellect. And then on the outermost, most visible layer are identity and behavior.
And the ultimate mission, the whole goal of navigating this model, is to eliminate what he calls the perception gap.
Yes.
Which is the difference between how we see ourselves, our internal reality, and how the world, our colleagues, our board, our customers actually perceive us based on our actions and our outcomes.
And if those two realities align,
right,
we achieve effectiveness. If they diverge, you have a blind spot. It's that simple.
Okay, let's jump into that outer ring then and start with the element that's closest to our conscious control, layer one. Identity, who do you think you are?
Right. So identity is the name tag you wear. It's how you complete the sentence, I am blank. Dubin puts it on the outer layer because, unlike core motives, which are really deep, identity is relatively easier to bring to consciousness. And because of that, it offers the largest immediate opportunity for meaningful change.
So the critical blind spot here is what he calls the identity versus role mismatch. This happens when our conscious self-view, the type of person we believe we are, clashes violently with what our current job, or the job we want, actually requires for success right now.
And Marcus suffered from this acutely. I mean, his self-identity was deeply fused with being the innovator and the hero.
Yeah.
The person who rushes in and solves all the big, spectacular problems.
Right, the firefighter.
Exactly. But the business had matured. It no longer needed a chaotic hero. It needed a business builder and a leader who's focused on systems, stability, and, dare I say it, supply chain management.
And because he clung to the comfort of that hero identity, he actually became the bottleneck. He insisted on signing off on every major decision because, the hero has to save the day, even as his time was spent chasing the next funding round.
And in doing so, he prevented his own talented team from taking the necessary ownership and making those systemic fixes. His identity, his idea of himself, kept him from taking on the internal-facing, power-sharing leader role that the business desperately required.
This mismatch, it must manifest in countless ways.
Oh, it does. Consider another example, Elizabeth. She was a powerhouse, incredibly skilled, known for her integrity, great at mentoring, yet she kept getting passed over for senior leadership.
And she couldn't figure out why.
No. And when her coach asked her to describe her value, she said, and this is so telling, I'm the invisible glue. I anticipate where problems might occur, and I try to fix things before anyone knows they're broken.
Invisible glue. Wow. That's a huge compliment to her execution ability. But talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy. She was literally telling the world she wanted to be invisible and not get credited for her work.
Exactly. Her identity blind spot was seeing herself as a supremely effective executor, a loyal, reliable number two, not a visible, decisive leader, a number one. Her colleagues perceived her as having the competence, but, lacking the necessary drive or desire for true authority. They said she didn't seem to know what she wanted.
I think the resolution here is one of the most actionable insights in the whole book. So how did she break out of that invisible glue identity?
Well, the change wasn't instant, but it was incredibly intentional. Once she was aware of the blind spot, Elizabeth consciously chose to change her brand. She started acting as if she already had the boss's job.
Faking it till you make it.
In a way, yes. It meant redirecting her energy away from the comfort zone of those tactical deep dives and focusing instead on leader priorities. High-level strategy, managing stakeholder relationships, and perhaps most importantly, speaking up in meetings. Articulating the strategic rationale for decisions instead of just quietly fixing the process behind the scenes.
So the behavior, the external output was changed first, which then eventually shifted the internal identity perception, both in herself and in others.
And that visible identity shift directly led to her promotion. It proves that sometimes you really do have to act the role you want to inhabit.
And this isn't just a random occurrence. The Dubin provides a really valuable structure for these identity shifts, noting they're often predictable based on your career stage.
Right. For entrepreneurial companies, the founder has to make this grueling three-part identity shift. From innovator, the person who birthed the idea, to business builder, the person who creates systems and processes.
And finally to leader, the person who delegates and focuses on culture.
Right. And failure to make those internal pivots is exactly why we see so much founder flame out and confusing executive turnover. They're stuck in the identity that made them famous, which is now the very thing hindering the organization's maturity.
And it happens in established companies too.
Absolutely. In established companies, the career path demands specific identity shifts. You move from being a subject matter expert or a tactical operator to a manager, a leader of individual contributors. Then you become an operational leader, leading other managers, and finally an enterprise leader where your impact is almost purely through influence. You're a leader of leaders.
I love that analogy he uses about the enterprise leader who is still worrying about the font selection for a company brochure.
Yes.
That is the perfect visual of an identity blind spot, focusing your attention on a tactical element from a previous role rather than the current strategic demands of your job.
And the actionable takeaway here is profoundly simple, but it does require ruthless honesty. Look at your calendar for the last 3 months. Analyze how you actually spend your time versus what your current role requires of you.
An identity blind spot reveals itself when your attention is directed by those inner historical identity voices. I am a brilliant coder, I am the best salesperson, rather than the actual high-leverage demands of your current position.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so if identity is the surface, then we are now drilling down to the bedrock, layer 2. Motive, the core forces driving who you are. This feels like the source code of our behavior.
It absolutely is. Motive is the innermost layer. It's the why, the deeply instinctual forces that define what feels like pleasure and what feels like pain to you. And because it's largely hidden from our conscious awareness and often formed very early in life, it is the most difficult element to fundamentally change.
So you can't just decide to have a different motive.
Not really. The power of self-awareness here is to gain control over how that motive manifests in your visible behavior.
So Dubin uses this classic framework from the organizational psychologist David McClellan, defining 3 universal shared human motives. We all have them, but we prioritize them differently.
Right, they are. Achievement, which is the drive for success's sake, innovating, solving difficult puzzles. Then there's affiliation, the need for social connection, recognition, love, or fame. And finally, power, which is the desire for control, freedom, and influence, often represented by financial security.
The blind spot arises not from having a motive, but from understanding its priority, or letting it override what you're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. Letting it override essential professional demands. Look at the case of Robert, a charismatic serial entrepreneur. He launched something like 20 companies, was incredibly intelligent, but all of them yielded surprisingly small returns and left his investors perpetually disappointed.
Why the consistent failure to capitalize? What was going on there?
Well, his core drivers were achievement. He loved the joy of innovating and affiliation, the satisfaction of building a really rewarding team. Financial success, the power motive, simply wasn't his primary psychological reward.
But he must have said he wanted financial success.
Oh, of course. But he was genuinely unaware of this internal disconnect. He was happily focusing 90% of his energy on product development and team cohesion, while the financial objectives and the exit strategy just languished. His blind spot was assuming that because he said he wanted money, his inner engine would automatically prioritize it. It didn't.
And then you have the complete opposite in Jeanette, the real estate agent. She was hyper-driven by the motive to win and maximize money pure power in every single deal.
Yes, and she saw agents who prioritized soft relationships, the affiliation motive, as weak or inefficient.
But that single-minded focus on winning, it became a fatal blind spot when the market slumped, right?
Absolutely. When times got tough, agents who focused on quick, balanced deals and strong relationships were still thriving. Jeanette, the tough negotiator, found herself isolated. Other agents literally avoided calling her because they knew working with her meant an exhausting fight over every single penny. Her dominant motive destroyed the social capital she needed to succeed in a complex relational market.
That's a really clear illustration that you need a balance of motives. But Dubin also digs into these specific, often deeply personal, unseen drivers. Motives like the need for approval or the need for perfect efficiency.
In the case of Sad, the CTO, perfectly illustrates how these personal motives can become crippling blind spots. Sad was hired for his technical rigor, but within months, the chief people officer called it a case of organ rejection.
Organ rejection, wow.
Yeah. He was brilliant, but impossible to work with. Short, abrasive, condescending. And it turned out his core, instinctual personal motive was this unrealized, almost anxious need for perfect efficiency.
And he admitted this motive ran his entire life, even outside of work. The obsessive search for the closest parking spot, refusing to make 2 trips for the groceries.
Exactly. That efficiency motive was a super strength when he was applying it to optimizing code.
Yeah.
But in a managerial context, how did it become so destructive?
Well, in his mind, anything that wasn't immediately optimal was perceived as anxiety-inducing waste. Explaining things to his team, engaging in lengthy relationship building, or handling nuanced political discussions felt wildly inefficient to him.
He just refused to spend time on them. He ran over his team in his rush toward the finish line. The deep-seated anxiety caused by that perceived delay was erupting into destructive emotional behavior.
This is where I want to push on the practical application, because this is fascinating. Thad couldn't change that core motive, so how did he fix the external output? How did he stop being a jerk?
He gained profound awareness. He realized that the anxiety arose not from the delay itself, but from the fear of the delay disrupting his internal clock. So he changed his behavior and he engineered his environment to satisfy the motive without harming his team.
What did she do?
He specifically added 10-minute gaps between all of his back-to-back meetings, and he started sending out detailed agendas in advance.
That's brilliant. So the 10 minutes gave him the psychological assurance of a buffer, satisfying his underlying need for controlled efficiency, which calmed his anxiety enough to allow him to be patient and relational during the actual meeting.
Exactly. He neutralized the destructive behavioral output of the motive by building these structural behavioral guardrails. And this lesson is critical. Motive blind spots always emerge most sharply at times of greatest stress. They force us onto autopilot, where the strongest, often unconscious motive takes control. You have to build structures to prevent that autopilot from taking over.
We saw this motive mismatch fatally block Sal's career. He was a candidate for CEO at Midwest Grocers, strategically brilliant, had all the skills, yet his meetings with his mentor, Don, were just fraught with unexplained tension and bickering. What was the root of Sal's issue?
Sal finally confessed his frustration. He said, "I do wish, just once, that Don would tell me how smart I am and how valuable I am to the company." His core driver, his motive, was a desperate craving for approval and affirmation.
That desire is so deeply human, but why was it a blind spot that disqualified him from the CEO role?
Well, the board, even if they couldn't articulate the psychology, they sensed the mismatch. One board member captured it perfectly, saying, "There's something that bothers me about Sal, but I can't quite put my finger on it." The reality is, a leader whose primary motive is chasing approval lacks the necessary backbone for the hard decisions that inevitably disappoint, alienate, or even anger people. The core desire for affirmation overrode the objective need for decisive, often unpopular leadership. The motive was exposed, and the candidacy was lost.
Okay, let's transition now. If motive is the source code, then layer 3. Traits are the structural engine that translates that power into action. This is where our biggest strengths can morph into our most devastating weaknesses.
Yes. Traits are those stable, consistent aspects of personality. Being introverted, highly curious, persistent, agreeable. The fundamental paradox here is that our greatest challenges often emerge because we have invested too heavily in our strengths.
Right. What you're most proud of can, in excess, tip over into qualities that frustrate others and block your path forward.
Attention to details is strength, but in excess, it becomes micromanagement. Confidence is essential, but too much becomes arrogance.
So Dubin uses the classic Big Five framework to anchor this discussion: extroversion, openness to experience, accommodation, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. And the problems always reside at the extremes.
Always. For example, high neuroticism, the tendency toward anxiety and worry, can be really valuable in identifying and mitigating risk. But it becomes destructive if it paralyzes the leader from making timely decisions.
Let's look at Esther, the pharmaceutical executive. She was defined by her trait of high conscientiousness.
Her super strengths were being cautious, deliberate, and avoiding undue risk. These were traits that gave her flawless judgment in her established, methodical farmer role. But then she took the CEO job at a high-growth startup, which required speed, boldness, and a serious bias for action.
And she couldn't adapt. Her innate caution caused her to constantly put off decisions, including delaying necessary structural changes and even postponing her own leadership coaching assessment. She just kept kicking the can down the road.
And her deliberation, which had always spelled success for her, became a fatal flaw in this new context. She failed to move at the necessary pace. She essentially ran out the clock on the company's growth window.
So she was ultimately fired.
Yes. And she was unable to see the problem because that specific trait had never been a problem before. It took a situational change, the move from big pharma to a startup, to expose her strength as a blind spot.
Now consider the inverse of that. Miguel, the brilliant programmer and co-founder, who is defined by extreme curiosity, persistence, and high openness to experience. These are the hallmarks of a visionary, right?
Right. But the problem was the excess. He was too open and too persistent. He continually injected new ideas, started unauthorized side projects, and diverted key employees from the strategic duties. He just created chaos and undermined the direction that the board had set.
This is where it gets really interesting because Dubin notes that Miguel was fully aware of his disruptive actions. So his blind spot wasn't a lack of self-knowledge.
No, it was arrogance, driven by his belief in his own extreme traits. He truly believed he was always right and that the company would fail without his constant disruptive innovation.
His failure was cognitive then. He failed to recognize that collaboration, focus, and respect for process were now the necessary traits for the business's survival. He was trapped by the brilliance of his own personality.
You've got it.
But wait, if Miguel was the disruptive force, let's look at his CEO co-founder, Brendan, who suffered from a trait blind spot of equal magnitude, overwhelming loyalty and agreeableness.
This is the perfect juxtaposition. Brendan's loyalty to Miguel was virtuous, sure, but it prevented him from taking the necessary action to stop the chaos. He was risking his own job and the company's future simply because he valued their relationship and admired Miguel's brilliance so much.
So loyalty, a core virtue, blinded him to organizational failure. How does a leader balance a necessary trait like loyalty with the requirement to hold people accountable or intervene when the organization is at risk?
That is the essential question of the trait layer. Dubin argues that when traits become blind spots, they become liabilities. Brendan needed to recognize that his loyalty was overriding his primary duty, his responsibility to the company's mission.
So what's the answer?
The answer lies in self-governance. We have to use our intellect and our behavior to manage the extremes of our traits. For Brendan, the behavioral fix would have been creating a specific non-negotiable process for challenging Miguel's new ideas before they were allowed to become official projects.
That makes a ton of sense. You can't just shed the trait of loyalty, but you can build a process to govern its expression.
Precisely. And the key actionable insight here, to discover your own trait blind spots, is to ask others the single most revealing question: what am I too much of? You need that external, candid feedback. Am I too smart, too careful, too energetic? Because those are the specific areas where you are overinvesting in a strength that is now beginning to burn out like a supernova.
Okay, we move now to the central ring, which focuses on internal processing. Layer 4, emotion and intellect. Let's start with emotion, this idea that feelings are actually actionable data.
For way too long, business culture has preached that emotions are a weakness to be bottled up. But Dubin argues the exact opposite. Successful leaders see feelings, theirs and others, as critical data to be analyzed and strategically deployed. Ignoring emotional data is a massive blind spot that cripples influence and team cohesion.
And he provides a rigorous model for emotional competence, outlining 5 stages of mastery. Failure at any stage creates a leadership blind spot.
Right. First is awareness of personal emotional bandwidth. Just being able to fully experience and understand the broad range of one's own feelings. Second is self-regulation, the ability to control, manage, and process your personal emotional responses, avoiding volatility.
Okay.
Third is awareness of others' emotions, or empathy, reading the room, accurately interpreting nonverbal cues, seeing things from their perspective. Fourth is strategic deployment, consciously using emotional techniques, deploying anger to signal an emergency deadline, or leveraging joy and celebration to motivate a team after a big win.
And the fifth?
The fifth is downstream impact, anticipating how an emotional moment will play out long term. It's essentially playing the emotional chess game.
Let's revisit the toxic environment at the fintech startup Platforma. Kimball, the CEO, suffered from acute emotional dysregulation.
Kimball was failing acutely at stages 2, self-regulation, and 3, empathy. He exhibited uncontrolled anger and debilitating paranoia toward his board and staff. He publicly berated his subordinates. His inability to manage his own anger and to perceive the fear he instilled in others just clouded his decision-making. It led to paranoia and a destructive culture driven by silence.
And his co-founder, Simon, the tech genius, was the opposite. Warm, engaging, but emotionally flat. He avoided confrontation, believing his job was solely technical.
And Simon failed miserably at stage 3, empathy, and 4, strategic deployment. While he was a pleasant person, he lacked the emotional tools to engage in difficult confrontation. He was unwilling to challenge Kimball despite the visible toxicity, feeling his duty as a co-founder because he preferred to avoid the emotional weight of conflict.
He was also unaware of the low-level anxiety his hands-off style caused his own technical team.
Exactly. And this highlights the common founder marriage flaw. We often pair people based on complementary skills, the money guy and the tech genius. But if the emotional relationship isn't based on mutual trust, respect, and the willingness to constructively fight, the high-stress environment will eventually break the partnership apart.
Now contrast this with Lauren, the CEO of VRBox, who embodied emotional mastery. She made the calculated decision to keep her predecessor, a founder named Jeffrey, involved on the team even though he was known to be difficult.
That's a huge risk. How did she manage that without letting him undermine her authority?
She used emotional data masterfully. She appealed directly to Jeffrey's need for continued involvement, which demonstrated stage 3, awareness of others' emotions. She managed her own ego and regulated her defensiveness, which is stage 2.
And by keeping him close, she honored the past, demonstrated supreme confidence, and exhibited stage 5, anticipating the downstream impact of smoothing that transition. She knew that managing a difficult relationship was better than making a powerful enemy.
And she deliberately built a diverse team, fully confident in her emotional dexterity to manage the constructive conflict that diverse thought inevitably brings. She even handled a public outburst from Jeffrey at a board meeting by simply ignoring it, allowing him to realize his error privately and apologize later. That level of self-regulation is truly impressive.
It showed that emotional mastery isn't about being charismatic or loud. It's about being strategically controlled, using emotion as information, and possessing the dexterity to manage complex human dynamics. Lorna was decisive and powerful, precisely because she used her emotional intelligence as a primary tool.
Okay, let's move from the heart to the head, exploring intellect. And the critical blind spot that being smart is often not enough.
Yeah, the intellect blind spot is the failure to recognize that there are different types of intelligence, or, frankly, the sheer arrogance of thinking one's own intellect is superior and sufficient, and can compensate for deficiencies in other areas. Relying solely on IQ is a classic trap.
So Dubin argues a balanced leader requires 4 distinct types of intellect.
He does. Number 1 is horsepower, IQ. The raw ability to process, analyze, and synthesize large amounts of data. 2 is processing speed. The quickness in grasping issues, spotting flaws, and making rapid, calculated decisions.
Okay.
3 is creative intellect. The ability to think out of the box, draw parallels from completely different domains, or approach problems from a novel angle. And 4 is street smarts business acumen. The ability to read people, possess political savvy, and trust one's instincts about market movements or internal politics.
If you over-index on one, you create a vulnerability.
Absolutely. Ethan, for instance, had high horsepower, analyzing every jam flavor permutation, but lacked creative intellect. Layla had high processing speed, allowing her to shoot from the hip successfully pretty often, but her horsepower was average, which led her to miss crucial data flaws. A well-rounded leader needs a blend.
And this brings us back to the fatal knowledge acquisition blind spot. The willful failure to invest energy in learning things a leader needs to know simply because they find those areas boring.
Yes. Marcus ignored operations. Another leader, Jasmine, admitted she ignored financial literacy.
This is where arrogance poisons intellect. It convinces the leader that they are done learning and can just assume away the necessary details of finance, supply chain, or HR simply because those areas don't engage their primary intellectual strength.
And Dubin maps these gaps using the blind zone matrix, which is extremely helpful for self-diagnosis. You've got the comfort zone, what we know, and the helpful anxiety zone, what we don't know, and are motivated to learn. But the danger zones are truly crippling.
They are. First, the terror zone. This is where you realize you don't know what you should know. The stakes are high, and the knowledge gap creates panic, paralysis, and poor choices.
Like the CEO who freezes up when the board suddenly demands a pivot because they lack the fundamental market knowledge to articulate an exit plan. They feel terror because they can't bluff their way through fundamental competence.
And the most dangerous is the blind zone. You don't know what you don't know. This is often only fixable by seeking external perspectives.
Right. This is what Rohan, the leader with strong street smarts, did when he hired consultants to quiz employees about their gut feelings regarding a key supplier. He knew his limits, and he went looking for the knowledge he couldn't even name.
Finally, Dubin tackles strategic thinking, which is often so poorly defined in corporations. He offers a practical, if slightly cynical, operating definition.
Yeah, he says strategic thinkers are those who demonstrate that they are thinking about what their boss is worried about.
I appreciate the honesty there, but that sounds almost too utilitarian. Doesn't strategic thinking have to be more expansive than just anticipating the CEO's concerns?
It does, of course, but Dubin uses that definition to highlight the perception gap. Strategic thinking requires the intersection of all 4 types of intellect plus curiosity. But if you don't demonstrate it on the issues that matter most to the enterprise leader, you won't be perceived as strategic. It's about a performance of intellect, in a way.
Take Nessa, the dependable HR executive who was labeled not strategic enough. Her intellect focused intensely on execution, the what else that needed to be executed. That's pure horsepower. She was highly reliable, but lacked visibility at the top.
So to fix this perception, she had to consciously lean into why not, which is creative intellect. She had to volunteer to own an enterprise-level high-visibility problem, like the Comprehensive Return to Work white paper, and demonstrate thinking that added value to her CEO's concerns, not just HR logistics.
She shifted the perception of her intelligence by changing the types of questions she asked and the issues she chose to own, forcing her intellect into areas that demanded ambiguity and creativity.
Exactly.
We've saved the most externally visible layer for last. Layer 5, behavior mastering communication, influence, and prioritization. This is the output layer, right? The way others experience all the layers beneath.
It is. Behavior is the easiest area to bring to conscious control and offers the largest opportunity for quick, visible correction because it is the external manifestation of your internal structure. The blind spot here is just defaulting to familiar, comfortable behaviors instead of choosing the optimal behavior required by the specific situation.
We start with communication blind spots, and this goes so far beyond words. It's about tone, nonverbal cues, and most critically, your actions. Your actions communicate your priorities to your entire team, even when your words say the complete opposite.
Look at Tanya, the CEO of a rigorous tech firm. She communicated a commitment to work-life balance not through an email, but by visibly blocking her calendar every single day for intense, non-negotiable workouts.
That single, unapologetic behavioral action gave her employees permission to prioritize their own lives and health. That fosters immense trust.
Now, contrast that with Jean, a VP who constantly preached company values about sacrifice and lean operations, but drove a luxurious car and flew first class everywhere, even for short hops.
His actions just screamed privilege and hypocrisy.
Absolutely. They sent a profoundly contradictory message that led to deep resentment and turnover. He was blind to the fact that his visible lifestyle behavior mattered far more than his words.
Because communication is so critical, Dubin details a necessary structure for navigating difficult communication in 5 acts. He argues that the majority of leaders, especially aggressive ones like the VC partner Zach, jump straight to Act 3, which is conflict, without laying the vital groundwork.
And these 5 acts are a mandatory sequence, especially when the subject is complex or sensitive. Act 1 is build rapport, creating goodwill. Act 2 is identify objectives and reveal facts, establishing mutual goals.
And then comes Act 3.
Then Act 3 is allow for conflict and challenge. Act 4 is achieve resolution. And finally, Act 5 is move to follow-up actions.
So Zach, for example, was frustrated with his PR firm. He called them up and immediately started detailing their failures and demanding changes. He jumped straight to Act 3.
He did. And because he skipped Act 1, rebuilding rapport, and Act 2, re-identifying objectives, the PR firm just felt attacked and defensive. The meeting failed because the conversation started in conflict instead of with a shared purpose.
Next are influence blind spots, the failure to realize that there are many ways to influence people beyond just logic or authority, and relying only on the tactics we're personally comfortable with.
Right. The rational, data-driven argument is only one of the 9 influence appeals. Leaders have to expand their influence arsenal to include relational appeals. I will do this task for you now, but remember our relationship for later. And inspirational appeals, appealing to a shared vision or values. Relying only on logic, especially with an emotionally driven team, is a huge behavioral blind spot.
The case study of the Colonel illustrates a mastery of non-charismatic influence. This is so interesting. In a room full of Type A personalities, the Colonel did something totally counterintuitive.
He did. He initially listened actively, asked probing questions to draw others out, and he consistently withheld his opinion until the discussion was fully complete.
And this quiet, intentional behavior achieved 3 things. It ensured he gained maximum information. It built relational trust because everyone felt genuinely heard. And paradoxically, it enhanced his authority.
It really did. People waited in anticipation for his final synthesized judgment. He was intentional about using silence and active listening as behaviors that were far more influential than authority or aggressive debate.
Finally, we turn to the most common external flaw in high-level leadership: prioritization blind spots. The failure to realize that the highest level roles are defined by what only that leader can do. This leads to so much misspent time and energy.
Dubin synthesizes the work of A.G. Lafley and others to define the 5 non-delegatable CEO tasks. They are selecting the senior team, having the final say on corporate priorities, making strategic resource decisions, owning the culture, and owning key external relationships. Everything else must be delegated or ignored.
And this is exactly where Yara, the CEO of the computer hardware business, stumbled. Her blind spot was focusing on the comfortable. She spent an inordinate amount of time dealing with the product team because product was her old area of expertise. She was effectively acting as the CPO.
And this behavioral prioritization flaw was catastrophic. Her micromanagement stifled the actual chief product officer, Milos, causing high turnover in that role. Meanwhile, she was neglecting the essential CEO-only duties like big-picture strategy and key external relationships.
What's so insidious is the vicious cycle this creates. She focused on product because she perceived a CPO crisis.
But her micromanagement caused the crisis, which then reinforced her internal belief that she had to prioritize the wrong thing. She saw the outcome and completely misidentified the cause.
So how do you avoid this?
You have to have an extremely clear role definition. Every successful leader, every few months, must audit their calendar and answer 4 questions. What do I own? Where do I share? Where do I delegate or supervise? And what do I ignore? If you are the CEO, and you are worrying about the font on a marketing brochure, you are actively failing to perform one of your 5 non-delegatable tasks.
So we have completed the journey through Martin Dubin's Blindspotting model, traversing the 6 interconnected layers that determine leadership effectiveness: identity, motive, traits, emotion, intellect, and behavior. It's so clear they are all linked.
Yeah, the central synthesis is that the goal is not to eradicate every flaw or become a fundamentally different person, which is impossible. The goal is to become the most self-aware, flexible, and adaptable version of yourself. One who understands exactly how their internal psychological structure plays out in their external professional behavior.
We saw this powerful interaction in the story of Angela, a senior leader who struggled with confidence and ambition. Tell us how her layers interacted.
Okay, so Angela was driven by a powerful ambition trait that was hypercharged by a deep, unconscious motive of overcoming her mother's unrealized professional potential.
Wow.
So when she was stressed or triggered, this motive caused an emotion blind spot, making her appear cold and agitated, which then fed her identity blind spot as an imposter, causing her to show uncertainty in meetings.
That's a powerful chain reaction. The core motive causes the emotion, which then reinforces the self-identity, and it all comes out in poor behavior.
And awareness broke the chain. She couldn't change that deeply rooted motive, but she could use conscious behavioral objectives to manage the external expression. She actively practiced acting as a stronger leader in meetings, changing her nonverbal behavior. And she used an accountability partner to process emotional triggers outside of the office. The surface changes neutralize the destructive power of the core flaws.
But Angela's story carries a final, sobering lesson. Even after achieving profound self-awareness, new blind spots can emerge when the context shifts or a new person enters your life.
That's right. After landing a huge new role, Angela's career ultimately stalled again due to a new blind spot: overwhelming loyalty to her new CEO and mentor, Tamika.
And Tamika was failing. She was trapped by her own trait blind spot of being too cautious for a high-growth environment. But Angela's loyalty blinded her to Tamika's failure.
She refused to use her considerable intellect and analytical skills to see the inevitable outcome. She just kept thinking she'll figure it out.
So like Brendan before her, Angela learned that loyalty, while a high virtue, can blind us to failure in the people we value most, particularly supporters or mentors. Self-awareness is not a one-time vaccine. It has to be applied universally, even to scrutinize our strongest virtues when they conflict with objective reality.
As we conclude this deep dive, consider this final provocative thought that ties back to the idea of situational blind spots. What critical decisions are you avoiding or rushing through right now? Perhaps finance, process, or manufacturing, because they fall into an area you find boring, and therefore you delegate or you just ignore it.
And what necessary competence gap are you risking simply because you are too arrogant to admit that even the smartest person in the room must still be willing to learn the basics? How can you use your anxiety about what you don't know, that productive anxiety zone, to motivate learning, instead of retreating to the comfortable yet potentially fatal certainty of what you already know?
Awareness is always the first and most painful step to flexibility.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Martin Dubin's Blindspotting. Until next time, stay curious and keep checking those blind spots.